If you're watching this, welcome. And before I begin, if this story strikes anything like the corner of your heart, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to read those places later. I arrived at the Whitman estate with my old coat damp at the hem and my breath smelling of roadside salt. The chandeliers glittered like frost inside the ballroom, and people moved beneath them as if gravity were made of champagne and silk. I had put on a dress that had sat on sale 3 racks down from the front of the shop. Someone had told me once that you could find dignity at the bargain counter if you looked hard enough. I tried to buy time with that idea. It pinched across my ribs and made me walk small, but I thought I could hold my head high long enough to be seen as a mother should be seen beside her son. David had called twice that morning. "Just come, Mom," he'd said, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his father died. He's always been gentle. Sometimes his softness felt like a rope between us, steady but thin. Amanda arranged things for him the way a stage manager arranges a scene. What to wear, who to greet, which pockets to empty. She had said nothing directly to me, only small silences that tightened the air. Patricia smiled from a distance, like a woman who keeps a separate closet for sorrow. Richard, the powerful, polite man of executive dinners, motioned as if welcoming a display into his house. The drive-in had been worse than the forecast. Connecticut winter does not ask permission before it becomes ice. Headlights skated across the slick road, and the radio offered only thin static and the scrape of my windshield wipers. I had been rehearsing the small speeches I might give, the short jokes I could make about thrift store finds, the way I would laugh at Amanda's stories so that David would see, and maybe, just maybe, the needle of distance between us would wander back toward the spool. Then a pair of hazard lights, like a small, hesitant confession, caught my eye. A car, spun half off the shoulder, sat like a frightened animal. I pulled over because I knew the look of panic on the road, the kind you feel in your chest before the world decides for you. I had learned long ago, from years of patching things and fixing what the world left frayed, that stopping was often the only right thing. She was younger than I expected. Wet hair, face flushed from the cold, eyes like someone who had been practiced in the art of looking away. For a moment, because grief does strange arithmetic in memory, I thought of her as she was at 16, hair scraped into a hurried bun, laugh smaller. And then recognition came jagged and immediate, the little white scar at the knuckle, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking hard. "Lily," I said, before I could stop myself. The name seemed old-fashioned when it left my mouth, as if it belonged to another weather, another me. She nodded, without saying mine back. There are things you cannot practice for. A daughter who has been gone, and the sudden verticality of seeing her return, as if a wound were reopening to test the new skin. We worked together in the snow. I balanced on my knees in slush because my husband had taught me to be thorough. He taught me to check for corroded battery clamps, to listen to an engine like an old friend. We pushed the hood up, and the smell of damp upholstery and stale cigarettes, habits that lived like ghosts, rose between us. The terminals were crusted with white powder. Her hands trembled as she handed me a bottle of Coke and a sponge, which is ridiculous and practical all at once. Soda to loosen corrosion, a trick I'd seen once in a workshop years ago. We laughed at how unglamorous the rescue looked, 2 women under a hood rubbing away time. When the car caught, when the engine turned over as if deciding it liked us, she laughed in a way that made me ache. "God, Mum," she said, and then the rest came spilling in a breathy, broken river. How she had been doing time in other people's rooms, and how addiction had been a shadow that learned to live in the corners of her days. Living in basements, in the backs of apartments, in borrowed beds. She said she had been clean for some months, that a counselor at a small program in New Haven had helped her, and that she had been trying to build something steady. Her voice sounded like it had been sanded, softened in places where it should have been sharp. I wanted to steady her. I wanted to stitch the years closed with the stupid faith that a single hug could change the weather. We both knew coming to the Whitman party would not be a simple reunion. I had not told David about Lily because what do you say? I had left the past folded and hidden like cheaper clothes in the back of the closet. Telling would have meant admitting my history had creases. But Lily had turned the idea of don't make waves into a rebellion and insisted she would come with me, if only to step into the same house, to see the faces that had once felt like judgment and the people I had wanted to be accepted by since David's wedding. So we drove the rest of the way in silence, her fingers cold around the steering wheel, mine wrapped protectively over hers. She sat in the back when we finally entered, preferring the shadows to the light, and I felt every head turn like a vein. Water fell from my coat and darkened the Persian rug, leaving imprints like a map of the storm. Amanda floated in with practiced cheer, a silken come-hither of introductions that never landed on me as personhood. "Margaret, so glad you could make it," she said, the words flat and pleasant like a pressed flower. She did not look at Lily. That moment, the way Amanda's gaze slid over us like the blade of a polite wind, hit a nerve inside me that had long been sore. We both knew coming to the Whitman party would not be a simple reunion. I had not told David about Lily because, what do you say? I had left the past folded and hidden like cheaper clothes in the back of the closet. Telling would have meant admitting my history had creases. But Lily had turned the idea of don't make waves into a rebellion and insisted she would come with me, if only to step into the same house, to see the faces that had once felt like judgment and the people I had wanted to be accepted by since David's wedding. So we drove the rest of the way in silence, her fingers cold around the steering wheel, mine wrapped protectively over hers. She sat in the back when we finally entered, preferring the shadows to the light, and I felt every head turn like a vein. Water fell from my coat and darkened the Persian rug, leaving imprints like a map of the storm. Amanda floated in with practiced cheer, a silken come-hither of introductions that never landed on me as personhood. "Margaret, so glad you could make it," she said, the words flat and pleasant like a pressed flower. She did not look at Lily. That moment, the way Amanda's gaze slid over us like the blade of a polite wind, hit a nerve inside me that had long been sore. There was a pod of people who gathered for the political economy of socializing, the right glass, the right laugh. I clutched my clutch until my fingers went numb, trying to remember how to be small and respectable. David found me with that expression he wears when he is trying to carry two things at once, love and the fear of doing the wrong thing. He squeezed my hand behind his back and whispered, "I'm glad you're here." He meant it. I could see that he meant it. But the room is a cunning thing. It makes generosity look like a performance and makes shame into a costume. The humiliation came in small, surgical pieces. An elder lady, Patricia, presented me to Eleanor as a guest from David's side, and then, as if embarrassed by the phrase, allowed a silence to expand between us. The introductions that were supposed to be ceremonial became a parade of subtle exclusions. A woman near the mantel turned the conversation to art school donations and slipped in a mention of the Whitman Foundation's Veterans Housing Initiative. And Amanda, with a laugh like a snapped ribbon, suggested I might not understand philanthropic strategy. I felt my cheeks burn. Pride and memory collided. I remembered the plastered bus stops where Lily had once stood. I remembered my husband's hands, calloused and sure, telling me that people who give you their scorn often expect nothing in return. I had come for recognition as a mother and found only a ledger of what I lacked. The cold had left salt traces on my shoes. The Persian rug swallowed them like an obedient, expensive citizen. People murmured, and something inside me built itself into a small, solid thing, the refusal to let my worth be calculated by how well I fit into a room. Lily sat, a quiet presence by the draped curtains, eyes down. No one, to my knowledge, mentioned her. It was as if she were a secret, agreed not to speak. That was when Eleanor approached me. I had seen her before in glossy corporate profiles, The photo of the founder in a gray suit, hair coiled like a coronet, a hand placed gently on a company crest. Up close, she is less statuary. Her scan held the maps of choices, and her eyes were steady as an accountant's ledger. When she spoke, people leaned in, perhaps because her voice had the authority of a hand that had signed many papers, and also of someone who had learned when to be quiet. "Margaret Sullivan," she said, and when she said my name, it landed with a weight that shook loose some old thing in me. She did not say David's mother or the mother-in-law. She said my name as a person might in a private room. "I watched you at the doorway. You stopped for someone on the road." Her observation surprised me. The ballroom had many mirrors and very little truth. I felt caught like a small bird. "It was nothing," I said, as if that would solve the ledger. "No," she said, stepping closer, as if the heat between us could be measured. "It was everything." The revelation in the library came later with a brandy that smelled of peat and promises. Eleanor led me and Lily by the arm, away from the flood of polite chatter. The library was a room designed to remind people of lineage: leather-bound books, a fireplace that hummed like a private engine, and a portrait of Richard Whitman, stern and not unkind. The arrangement of the room was calculated. The library makes people small in the best way, as if power is only as impressive when it sits in a quiet chair and invites conversation. Eleanor poured the brandy and then sat across from us, careful and intent. James Morrison hovered like a discreet witness, lawyer, friend, the sort of man who puts pads of paper in meeting rooms and assures people that their confessions will be respected. Mrs. Chen's knitted scarf had been draped over the back of a chair in the entry earlier when she had come to wish me luck. She was the unassuming neighbor who always brought pies and wisdom in equal measure. She had stayed at the edge of the party, watching. I wanted to tell Lily to stand up and demand dignity. Instead, I felt my own muscles tighten, old reflexes of deference making my shoulders small. Eleanor began with a story. She told us how Whitman Industries began in a garage, how Richard had sold a single design and then built an empire that relied on the very hands that most people kept unseen. She spoke of values not as slogans, but as a ledger of human costs and returns. Work that dignifies, not humiliates. Programs that build the person more than the resume. Her voice was precise. It surprised me when she said, "We have been doing something quietly for some time." Lily looked at the floor. She started, and then closed her mouth as if the words would shatter. Eleanor smiled at her, not with pity, but with a kind of ruthless clarity. "We have a small vocational pilot program," she said. "We hire people who need a second chance, and we train them. We pay them and provide counseling. We pair them with mentors. It's been under the radar because there is dignity in privacy and pride in what a person can build when they are not being paraded." The secret landed like a stone. My throat closed. For a moment, I felt as if someone had taken the ribs out of the room and replaced them with glass. Lily looked up then, and the light in her face was terrible and bright. "I've been part of it," she said. "I used the name that James gave me when I started. I came in late last year as part of a maintenance crew. No one knew who I was. I kept my head down. I tasted the brandy and found it tasted like a memory of something I had no right to hold. The secret broke me, not because she had been working, but because it meant that while I had been outside, being whispered about and made small, the house I had come to seek acceptance from had been giving her a lifeline in silence." James Morrison gave a small, discreet nod, as if the correct legal language had been arranged on invisible pads and signed. My first reaction was disbelief. Who was I, the woman who bought shoes on discount, to be offered anything by a man who had built an empire? My second reaction was a rush of something warm and fierce. The idea that I could turn the small, practical things I knew, how to fix a battery, how to steady a frightened person, into service that might keep other people from falling into the places my family had been. This felt like a reweaving of the thread that had frayed after my husband died. The third reaction, the one that crouched beneath my ribs like a sleeping animal, was fear, of failure, of being used, of becoming another story told politely. Lily's voice trembled when she spoke next. "I didn't tell you because I wanted—" She stopped and laughed softly, a sound like a key trying a lock. "I wanted to be clean in my own 2 feet before I asked for help at home. I didn't want pity to come sorted with the label, 'my mother.'" Her admission was a salt that stung and the balm that soothed. It was honesty in a room of genteel pretense. I found myself saying words I had feared I would never again have the right to say. "I am proud of you." They felt small and awkward, but true. The library hummed with an odd tenderness, firelight and the low murmur of a party that believed the night was about celebration, not revelation. Eleanor tapped the glass of brandy against the table softly. "If you accept," she said, "you will not be an ornamental figurehead. We are expanding into community centers and halfway houses. We need someone who understands how dignity is restored through work and who can teach practical skills, the kind that keep people moving forward. We will pay you. We will put you on the payroll. And we will employ Lily openly, if she wants that. No anonymity, no secrecy, unless she asks for it. We want transparency with choice." There is a kind of wound that opens when help comes with conditions, but Eleanor's was different. She was offering a new ledger, account for dignity, account for autonomy. The secret that had broken me, the knowledge that help had been extended without my knowledge, had also cleared a space, a place where I could, if I chose, turn my humiliation into leverage for something that mattered beyond the ballroom. I could have refused. I could have counted my hurt and folded it as proof that the world is a place intent on making people small. Instead, the thing that kept me going, fatigue stitched with stubbornness, softened toward possibility. My hands smelled of grease from the road and of brandy now, and those smells somehow belonged together. The smell of work and the smell of ceremony. Perhaps that is why the offer felt like air finally finding the right lungs. We left the library with a new arrangement humming like a draft under a door. People continued to murmur as if nothing of consequence had happened. At a party like that, consequences tend to be invisible, passed under the tablecloth like secret coins. I walked out into the cold with Lily at my elbow. Her fingers were warmer now. We did not speak much on the way home. The car seemed to hold too much newly arranged possibility for words. But when she reached over and took my hand, squeezing it in a way that said she was trusting me with the story of her life, the old fear loosened its grip just enough for hope to slip through. That night I slept poorly, waking to the sound of snow hitting my window like small, persistent questions. I thought about the secret that had bruised me earlier, not merely that it had happened, but that it had been hidden, kept safe in a room of leather and ledger. I thought about how many families and companies make mercy a spectacle, and at the same time keep private the ways they try to repair the world. I thought of Mrs. Chen, who had once told me that people are often too proud to accept a hand when it is offered in public, but will grasp it in private. Perhaps that was what Eleanor thought too. Over the next days, whispers circulated like a slow current, first under the breath of the club ladies, then out into the street where merchants passed the news along with coins and gossip. Some of it was practical, questions about hours, about pay, about where the workshops would be held. Some of it wore the thin disguises of concern. Were we sure this would help? Would Lily be safe in such a place? Others carried the sharper edges of envy or calculation. Who would stand to gain from associating with a woman of our name now, and who would be embarrassed by it? People I had only ever seen at luncheons came to the door of my small house, bringing casseroles and curious smiles. Mrs. Fenwick, who at the party had made the brief sign of approval with her chin, stopped for tea and spent half the visit asking whether we had adequate shelving for tools. She pronounced very loudly across the kettle's hiss that she never suspected I could teach anything more than etiquette. Her surprise, I thought, was almost a kindness. It meant she had never taken the time to know me at all. There were harder moments. The club's notice board acquired a thin ache of letters in the days that followed, some welcoming, many speculative. A friend of my late husband's, who had always measured his charity by the thickness of his gloves, dropped a card that read, "For such a venture, one must have a manager who knows the world." He considered me, politely, like a curiosity in a display case. I kept that card folded in the drawer until the glue in it softened, then burned the paper in the grate because the heat of it felt final in a way conversation never had been. Eleanor, as always, moved in a manner that marked the course of things. Two men whose faces carried the geography of hard years showed up with bicycles in varying states of despair. And then there was someone named June, an elderly woman who could not remember a name for the object she had brought until I told her it was a radio. When I said it, the recognition came back to her in a small, delighted squint. I had, at home, spent my afternoons balancing carburetors and teaching Lily how to replace a battery without shocking the wires nor the pride of the owner. Those hands, the ones that had once tightened a bolt on my husband's car in the late hours of drought and rain, had a memory that was both mechanical and moral. I felt them warm under the light, and the feeling was not small. I began with the simple things: how to identify a terminal, how to make a clean connection, how patience was, in fact, a tool as important as a wrench. There were awkwardnesses. My first demonstration on a small engine was interrupted by the curious attentions of some who had read the earlier gossip and expected spectacle. A man from a local paper who had arrived under the suggestion that the charity owed the community a public accounting stood at the doorway with a notepad and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Will there be a ribbon cutting?" he asked, as if the practical work could be reduced to a headline. "You can have your ribbon cutting," I replied, "but you must cut it in the workshop and let the person whose life changes by the ribbon hold the scissors." He blinked, then made some note that would later become a phrase in the public column. I could not help but notice the way Lily watched me, the shy tightness at the corner of her mouth. She had agreed to be visible, but she was learning, like all of us, how visibility felt when the street leaned in. The first real test came when the battery of Tomas's old van refused to take a charge. He had driven that van for years. It was the thing that sat under his livelihood, a small arc of his independence. He sat at the table and watched while I explained the connectors, my hands moving in a rhythm remembered from nights and oil lamps. At one point, I looked up and found June beside me, her fingers on my wrist as steady as if she had done it 1,000 times. "You show him the round bit," she said gently, and when I looked at the radio to check the part she meant, a small laugh escaped both of us, two people separated by a half-century naming the same thing. Lily, for her part, discovered a way to be useful without being exposed. She sat at the back table and began to repair a radio with the quiet focus that had always belonged to her when she mended clothes in the small kitchen we kept. A young man named Darren, who had arrived extra tired from night shifts, watched her hands like a study in attention. When she passed him a soldered wire, his gratitude was immediate and startling. He took her hand for a brief second in a grip that said more than any speech. By the end of the day, there were small victories. Tomas's van coughed to life and then purred, and he wept when the engine steadied, because the van meant a route he could travel to find work. The bicycle men fixed spokes and learned that a little brass file could rescue the wheel from a slow, humiliating surrender. June left with her radio singing a staticky hymn under the streetlight. I watched them go, the streets swallowing their silhouettes, as if the city preferred not to let the miracle be seen for too long. Yet even as the work breathed, the whispers did not cease. The paper's article came out the next morning, not cruel but not kind either. It described a charitable experiment and ran a photograph of my hands over the engine. Some letters arrived at my door, notes of gratitude and invitation, others thinly veiled warnings that our involvement with Eleanor's group might drag us into alliances that had consequences down the line. It was the sort of thing the old friend had meant when he spoke of managers and the world. It assumed I could be moved as easily as a chess piece. That assumption irritated me more than it should have. I found that the indignation it provoked was less about my pride and more about a fear of being made an example. I had been made into a cautionary tale once. I would not allow myself to become a symbol in someone else's sermon. There were practical problems, too. The supplies Eleanor's envelope bought were adequate but not limitless. The logistics man sent a message about a shipment delayed by weather. We found ourselves improvising with tape and patient explanations. You can make a connector hold with a twist and a prayer, or with the knife to strip the wire clean. The work taught us the holiness of small tools. Late that week, as snow began to lace the eaves again, Eleanor came by to observe. She stood in the doorway, her coat dusted with powder like a careful oath. She watched the room with an expression that was mostly satisfaction and partly something I could not name. After an hour, she came up behind me while I soldered a terminal and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You are teaching them how to keep going," she said. "That is what builds a life." I felt in that moment the old fear sharpen and then loosen. "And what do you expect from me?" I asked. My voice was low enough that the others would not hear. "Only that you do what you have done. Work honestly, refuse spectacle if it robs people of dignity, and let Lily decide how much she shares," she replied. Fair. The word surprised me by its steadiness. It was not an acceptance of patronage so much as an agreement of terms. My labor and the condition that it remain mine. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, and the city settled into evening. Inside, the workshop hummed like a heart. I thought of my husband, of the way he had taught me to trust my hands when words failed. I thought of Lily's small laughter and the way she had held my fingers in the car that night, choosing to trust. The whispering world could talk itself into a frenzy if it wished. In the room beside us, under a lamp and over a bench, people were learning to fix the things that kept them moving. That, I decided, was enough to begin. The following morning brought a visitor I had not expected, the man who had first spoken to Eleanor. Mr. Whitaker, as the envelopes had named him, arrived at the workshop with an assistant and an overcoat that smelled faintly of cedar. He looked at the place with an expression that read like surprise and then approval. He spoke haltingly about expansion and possibilities, about generous grants and naming rights. The assistant took notes. The assistant's hand trembled ever so slightly when the word naming was used. I listened, spreading a rag over the bench to catch the tiny sparks of solder. When Mr. Whitaker finished, leaning forward like a farmer offering seed, I said slowly, "If you wish to help, you may, but you must accept that some of what we do will not be shown in your name. Some of it is private, repair, dignity, second chances. You may fund the work and step back." He laughed, which did not reach his eyes. "People like to see where their money goes," he said. "They want confirmation." "We will show them results," I answered, "but we do not want to make people into stories for the evening's entertainment." Whitaker considered me, then inclined his head. "Very well," he said. "We will discuss this. I see your point." He left a check that would buy a set of tools, and a photograph of the check later appeared in the society column beneath a caption about philanthropy. Lily read the column and then folded it into her pocket without comment. I wondered, in the quiet that followed, whether a balance could be kept between the aura of charity and the brick and mortar of work, between being helped and being used. As winter thickened and the classes continued, small tensions kept round the edges of the workshop like mice around a warm hearth. There were moments of pride, Lily accepting her first paycheck and tucking it into her purse like a new strange treasure, and moments of fear, such as when a neighbor tried to enlist the workshop's trainees for an illegal repair job, and we had to tell him no. Each refusal was a stitch that mended my confidence. On a Wednesday toward the end of that first month, we prepared for a slightly larger class. The doorbell rang, and more people filed in than we had seats for. I felt my old flinch at being surrounded, at exposure, but it quickly receded. I told them to gather close, to look at the parts laid out on the table, wires, terminals, small fuses, and to watch what patience could do. As I picked up the soldering iron and felt the warmth travel through my fingertips, I realized that the night we had spent at the library, the brandy and the hush, had been the beginning of a ledger far different from the one that had once been kept for me. The lesson began. Hands leaned in. Lily moved among them like a careful shadow, offering a thread of instruction here, a soft correction there. For a long while, the room filled with the small sounds of repair, the rasp of a file, the scrape of a wire being stripped, the tiny, confident click when a connection found its place. I watched them and felt, in that quiet, a kind of repair happen inside myself, too. When the bell on the street rang and the night deepened, someone at the back of the room cleared their throat and asked if anyone could teach them how to fix a radio that had belonged to a husband. The question hung in the air like a lit match. The person asking it had not known that June's radio would be fixed that morning. She had not known that in fixing things, we sometimes also fix one another. I looked at Lily. She met my eyes, and then, without the old shield of reserve, she stood and answered. "Bring it tomorrow," she said. "We'll make it sing again." For the first time since the offer had been made in that library room, I felt the hard thing that had crouched beneath my ribs, fear, shift into something else. It did not leave entirely, but it was joined now by a stubborn, cautious hope that hands and could work. Outside, the snow had begun again, softer this time, blurring edges and making the city patient for a little while longer. We swept the tools into their boxes and closed the shutters. The workshop was small and the world large, and between those two things, we had begun to set up a life that could, at least for some, hold them both. Morning came thin and pink. Snow still fretted at the edges of the street, but the air in the workshop was already full of small combustions, a kettle, the rasp of a file, voices lowered into the steady cadence of work. June had wrapped the radio in a scarf and brought it like an offering. She set it on the table with hands that trembled less than her voice, and when she looked up at us, there was no theatricality, only the plain, fierce need to hear what had been kept in her house. Lily set herself at the radio as if she had always belonged to its innards. She traced the casing with one finger, then opened it with a care that made me think of turning a page in a book you hoped was not ended. Others clustered, not to stare, but to learn. The trainee who had once been eager for quick money held back, watching the respect with which screws were loosened and parts were examined. We worked in silence for long moments, the kind of silence that is full of listening. I passed a length of wire, she took it and soldered with a deliberation that had neither haste nor fear. When the tube glowed and the radio breathed static, a small sound like a bird startled into flight, June closed her eyes. Then, slowly, a voice spoke from the speakers, a voice that was not new but felt like an old friend returning. The room exhaled. June laughed and cried at once. She pressed both hands to the radio and then to Lily's wrist, thanking without grandiosity. For a moment, I watched them both, and I understood that what we had built was not a place to be photographed, but a place to keep people whole. Mr. Whitaker sent another letter, polite and circumscribed. He continued to offer support in phrases that sought the comfort of his name. We accepted what we needed and kept the rest private. The photograph of our patched bench never ran with the caption. The work kept its own small light. Spring was a rumor in the gutters. People brought more things to mend: shoes, chairs, a child's wooden toy. And we mended them as if mending would teach us all how to live with the breaks. Lily took on more of the teaching. The trainees grew steadier. I found that fear had not left me entirely, but it had learned to make room beside hope. On quiet evenings, when the city street lamps turned gullible and soft, we would shut the shutters and sit with the tools as if around a table. Outside, the world went on, indifferent and vast. Inside, there was the careful business of repair, hands learning the patience of joining two pieces, voices learning the patience of listening, a radio singing again and proving that some things could be made to last without need of an audience.